I now call to order the Committee on House Administration for today's hearing on the Smithsonian Institution. And we appreciate Acting Secretary Horvath coming and all his staff that's coming in, and we appreciate them bringing him. And before I make my opening statement, let me just say I think we've all had an opportunity to look at some of the coolest things here. As you see, this is a bit unusual for a committee hearing to have Smithsonian artifacts here, but everyone will get a chance after the hearing to take a look at them all. They are really unbelievable. I mean, you've got some meteorites here, sort of makes you think of Jurassic Park or something, right? And the first heart, artificial heart, a picture that Smithsonian was just telling me they got off of eBay, actually, of Harriet Tubman, which they apparently had to do almost nothing to. It was in such great condition. Somebody took a lot of pride in keeping that picture. And so anyway, everyone will have a chance to take a look at some of these artifacts, but we thought it would be a way to sort of set the stage, if you will, for what goes on at this unbelievable national treasure of the Smithsonian. In fact, I told some of your staff when I leave here I'm going to try to get a job at the Smithsonian. It's such a cool thing. No, I'm kidding, but wow, really, really amazing. Today we're holding this hearing to discuss the current priorities of the Smithsonian Institution as well as challenges and opportunities on the horizon. Congress established the Smithsonian Institution in 1846 to carry out the will of English scientist James Smithson. Smithson sought, quote, to found at Washington under the name of the Smithsonian Institution an establishment for the increase and diffusion of knowledge, unquote. And since that time, the Smithsonian has developed into the largest museum and research complex in the world with 19 museums, 9 research centers, and of course a national zoo. The Smithsonian's collections include more than 138 million items which form the basis for the institution's exhibits, educational programs, and research activities. Last year, more than 28 million people visited Smithsonian museums and the National Zoo, 99 million viewed their website, and more than 6,000 volunteers joined 6,300 employees to accomplish the work of the institution. The Smithsonian is much more than our nation's attic. It plays an important role in collecting, preserving, and making accessible our nation's history and culture, as well as advancing critical scientific discovery and research. And while the institution encompasses the renowned museums on the National Mall, which all of our constituents appreciate visiting at absolutely zero cost, it also includes research facilities in Panama, an astrophysical observatory in Massachusetts, traveling exhibits at affiliated museums across the U.S., and a strong international presence across the globe. The size and scope of the Smithsonian presents enormous opportunities to achieve their mission of continually increasing the reach of knowledge. This committee commends the Smithsonian for their unrelenting effort in identifying those future opportunities. One major opportunity for the Smithsonian is to leverage their collections to enhance education and to inspire lifelong learning. Education is fundamental to the Smithsonian's mission and certainly one of the most important services the institution can provide. The committee is very interested to hear how the Smithsonian is revitalizing education, especially in the case of increased digital access for schools through 3D printing and plans for expanding those activities. There are also significant challenges in managing such a complex entity as the Smithsonian. One ongoing challenge is to serve as stewards of their vast collection, which includes priceless objects of immense historical, cultural, and scientific value, and which range in size, scope, and diversity, from the smallest organisms and insect specimens to various artwork mediums and live animal exhibits. The Smithsonian collections are fundamental to achieving the institution's mission now and in the future. This committee held a hearing last Congress, and we heard from then Smithsonian Inspector General, who identified collection stewardship as one of the most pressing issues for the Smithsonian. Management indicated work was ongoing to improve current collections management and to plan for the future. So we look forward to hearing about that progress. In addition to collection stewardship and education, we would like to receive an update on how the institution is preparing for the National Museum of African American History and Culture. In that opening, which is targeted for completion next year, I believe, and about a recent announcement as well regarding the Smithsonian exhibition space possibly being part of a cultural complex in London. The Smithsonian Institution is cherished by all Americans, and each of us feels a personal responsibility to ensure the success of this valued institution and its continued operation for future generations. The Smithsonian is truly one of the great treasures of our nation and the world, and we look forward to the institution's continued service. So again, we thank our witness for his attendance. I'll formally intro him in just a moment. At this time, I'd like to recognize our ranking member, Mr. Brady, was not able to attend, and I'd like to recognize Mr. Vargas, the gentleman from California, who represents him today, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Again, I want to thank you for holding. I think that my microphone is having some feedback problems or issues here. There you go. I apologize for that. Again, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank you for holding this oversight hearing today and for giving the Smithsonian a chance to show off some of its treasures earlier this morning, as you were noting. So again, thank you very much for that. This is a period of rising expectations for the Smithsonian Institution. A new secretary will arrive in a few weeks, and the Smithsonian African American Museum will open in less than a year from now. And by the way, it is magnificent. Every time I drive or walk by there, I get very excited. It really is looking magnificent. Also, an historic national campaign in raising a record amount of private funds for the institution and a museum of American Latino within the Smithsonian has been recommended by a national commission that will be reviewed by our committee this year. A proposed National Women's History Museum is about to be studied by another commission, and the visitors' advanced levels at the Smithsonian Museum are about on the rise. The value of the Smithsonian endowment is at a record high, and the cost of admission of the American people is still zero. I commend Acting Secretary Horvath. Again, thank you very much for your ability to step in quickly and to assure the continuity during the period between Secretary Kluge's departure and Dr. Skorton's transition out of Cornell University. This is a busy season for our constituents who visit the Smithsonian during the warmer months, and we often hear from them how much they enjoyed the experience. I have to say that I was able to go recently to the National Portrait Gallery and was very excited to see the Athenaeum, Gilbert Stuart's magnificent painting of George Washington, and also to see the Lansdowne. And my understanding is the Lansdowne is about to go in for some needed work. But it was very exciting to see those two magnificent paintings there. And although I believe the Athenaeum is shared with the Boston Museum, I think it's half and half. I think that's the deal. But again, I welcome you here to this hearing. It is such a joy to have you here, and we're very, very proud of your institution and the work that all of you have done. Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Do any other members wish to make an opening comment or statement? Okay, at this time I'd like to introduce our witness. Albert Horvath became the acting secretary of the Smithsonian on January 1st of this year, following the retirement of Secretary Wayne Clow. He will serve in this position until the end of this month, and we had an opportunity to have you in our office last week, I think it was. You said it was a very fast-paced last several months and very eye-opening and interesting. But as was mentioned, David Skorton will take over as the 13th Secretary of the Smithsonian on July the 1st. As acting secretary, Mr. Horvath oversees the thousands of staff members and multiple projects that are underway within the Smithsonian Institution. Before becoming the acting secretary, he was the undersecretary for Finance and Administration and chief financial officer of the Smithsonian, where he managed administrative offices, including facilities and maintenance, human resources, security, and financial operations. And we are happy to say that that is a position that he will be returning to as well following his tenure as acting secretary. And before coming to the Smithsonian in 2011, his career spanned more than 30 years and in the administration at 5 different universities and the Mellon Bank. So we certainly thank the acting secretary for being with us today. And at this time, we recognize you for your statement, sir.
Thank you very much. Chairman Miller and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to testify this morning. In 1846, Congress established the Smithsonian as a public-private partnership dedicated to the increase and diffusion of knowledge. Roughly 60% of our annual funding comes from federal appropriations, 40% from philanthropy and other sources. The federal commitment provides the critical foundation for all that we do and is helpful in attracting private support. We are grateful for the continued confidence of the administration, the Congress, and the American people. I assure you that the confidence is more than justified. The state of the Smithsonian is strong. We are making great progress and will welcome our 13th secretary on July 1st, Dr. David Skorton, currently president of Cornell, who will push for even more progress. Since January 1st, I have been privileged to serve as acting secretary. Upon Dr. Skorton's arrival, I will return to my previous post as Undersecretary for Finance and Administration and Chief Financial Officer. I will do so firmly convinced that the Smithsonian is more efficient and entrepreneurial than ever. It is also more effective in offering close-up, authentic experiences of what it means to be an American. For example, on May 8th, I stood atop our American History Museum to witness the World War II flyover celebrating Victory in Europe Day. I'm sure many of you saw the historic planes flying over the National Mall. Our National Air and Space Museum Director, General Jack Daly, participated. The former Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps was in the P-51 Mustang in the formation that executed the Missing Man maneuver. The next day, some of the participating planes were on display at our Air and Space Museum's Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center for all to see. The center also houses, among many treasures, the Space Shuttle Discovery, which flew over the National Mall 3 years ago. Online, we offer a three-dimensional scan of the Wright Flyer that any teacher, student, or lifetime learner can download free of charge. As I looked west that day, I saw our National Museum of African American History and Culture rising out of the ground. Museum curators have collected more than 33,000 artifacts, including the Spirit of Tuskegee airplane. The museum is targeted to open in the fall of 2016. We continue to implement our 2010 strategic plan that focuses on our 4 grand challenges. We have an ambitious agenda. The first phase of the renovated West Wing of our American History Museum reopens on July 1st. The Smithsonian American Art Museum's Renwick Gallery reopens on November 13th after a significant revitalization. We can offer so much to so many people because the Smithsonian is the largest museum and research complex in the world, with passionate professionals and volunteers devoted to their work. We have 19 museums and galleries, 20 libraries, 9 research centers, the National Zoo, and 201 affiliate museums in 45 states, Puerto Rico, and Panama. We are open 364 days a year, and admission is free. We operate in more than 130 countries. If you can't come to us, we're coming to you through digital technology. Our more than 200 websites attract 100 million unique visitors. We have 6.6 million followers on Facebook and Twitter alone. Last year, our museums and galleries had almost 27 million visits, and another 4.5 million people visited our traveling exhibitions in all 50 states. Our collections total 138 million objects, including 127 million scientific specimens, 340,000 works of art, 2 million library volumes, more than 2,000 live animals, and much more. Some of those treasures you see on the table in front of you. We protect and present some of the nation's greatest treasures, everything from the Star-Spangled Banner to the Hope Diamond, the Lansdowne portrait of George Washington to the skeleton of T-Rex, Edison's light bulb to Nat Turner's Bible. We take stewardship of these treasures very seriously, as reported to this committee 2 years ago. Since that time, we've made many improvements and completed an in-depth study of collection space needs that will inform our long-term capital plan. Our 500 scientists are making important discoveries, especially regarding biodiversity issues through our Forest Geo, or Global Earth Observatories network. It is a worldwide partnership monitoring the health of 6 million trees in 24 countries. Our new Tenenbaum Marine Observatories initiative, or Marine Geo, seeks to replicate this success and assess the health of coastal areas and the oceans. We offer American, Asian, and African art. We deliver educational materials to students and teachers in all 50 states. More than 2,000 learning resources, all tied to state standards, are available online for free. For 30 years, our Smithsonian Science Education Center has been improving K-12 education in our nation's schools through its innovative STEM program. We do have concerns about the age and upkeep of our 12 million square feet of facilities, particularly at our Air and Space Museum, our zoo, our Freer Gallery of Art, our Arts and Industries Building, the Castle, and other sites. We will need your continued support in those areas to ensure the vitality of these spaces, many of which are historic. Our 6,400 dedicated employees and 5,500 generous volunteers are creative, resourceful, and dedicated to our mission. That is why, for the 5th year in a row, the Smithsonian was ranked as one of the best places to work in the federal government. All of us are honored to be part of this great American institution. As we face both exciting new opportunities and imposing challenges, we will carefully steward the critically important resources provided by the federal government. Again, I thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And you mentioned that you had 138 million artifacts. As you may or may not know, the Miller family has a bit of history with one of those, 138 million. My husband, who was a fighter pilot in Vietnam, over 30 years ago delivered an F-100 Super Sabre jet, which is on display there now at Udvar Hazy. So all the old fighter pilots like to hang around and look at those old jets, that's for sure, and remember the glory days there. But at any rate, my first question for you is really, I was looking through your strategic plan here, and as you mentioned about how you really want to increase in revitalizing education, and I have a particular interest in that, as I think I mentioned to you when you were in my office. Southeast Michigan, where I come from, was really so incredibly hard hit during the very painful economic transition. Our kids could hardly even get on a bus to take a field trip anywhere. And one of the things we really tried to do during that time, many of us in some of these areas, were to just make sure that here's this fantastic wealth of knowledge and all of these things that are happening, and whether it's the Library of Congress or the Smithsonian, et cetera, and how we can have a resources for the teachers to make that part of the curriculum. And, you know, kids are so used now to accessing everything electronically. And as you mentioned about these 3D printers, they really are amazing what they're doing in the school. So could you talk a little bit about, that is part of your revitalizing education portion of your strategic plan, and how you can help with education throughout the entire country here, really making sure that kids have access to all of these fantastic avenues of knowledge?
Certainly. The Smithsonian at its core is an educational institution. We have these wonderful objects. We do tremendous research. But one of our main objectives is to be able to get this information out as broadly and widely as possible. We've had a long tradition of education being an important aspect of what we do. As mentioned, for 30 years through the Smithsonian Science Education Center, we've been providing science curriculum free of charge throughout the country, tailored to local standards for teachers, for students, for school districts. We feel it's important to try and help address the issues of STEM education and the like across the country. A place where a couple of our priorities in the strategic plan come together is education and digitization. So one of the kind of buzz phrases that we've developed at the Smithsonian is, if you can't come to the Smithsonian, we want to get the Smithsonian to you. And one of the strategies to do that is through digitization. So all of these wonderful objects that we have, we're trying to digitize all of them, make them available to people across the country, in fact across the world, for students K through 12, higher education, lifelong learners. Provide these objects so that they can be studied and worked with in a classroom, and not only in our spaces in Washington, D.C. We're working on 3D printing so that not only can you render 3D objects online, but then also transfer them to printers and have your students create their own models of the Wright Flyer or the Space Shuttle. We're, in fact, in the middle of digitizing the Space Shuttle at this current time. So all of these activities and many, many more, we're focused on, again, to try to continue to play an important role in forwarding education across the country.
Could you tell us a little bit, I guess the National Zoo is really your biggest visitors, and you have more visitors there, I'm not sure, than any of your other things, but the museums, it's the Air and Space, I believe. that has the most amount of visitors. But at any
Air and space and natural history always are neck and neck.
neck and neck, okay. Well, I understand that sort of the outer envelope, if you will, of the air and space is in need of some serious structural repairs, and maybe you could tell us a bit about how you're planning for that and what we need to be aware of here.
Certainly. We have a long-term capital plan. We have, as I mentioned, 12 million square feet of space, and so keeping those buildings vital and functional is an important priority for us. A renovation of the building systems of air and space had long been on our plan, and we had envisioned it being our next big priority following the completion of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. As we began the process of assessing the work that we would need to do and doing our feasibility study, we unfortunately uncovered the fact that the outer envelope, the facade that is comprised of Tennessee pink marble, is actually thinner in size than it should have been. And unfortunately, after 40 years almost of wear and tear, it is starting to crack and bow. We've now had 3 independent assessments by experts, and they've all concluded that that stone needs to come down and be replaced. It's just too thin to be repaired, and so all of that stone will need to be replaced. That's in addition to the other work that we had contemplated we would need to do anyway, like upgrading our air handling systems, completing repairs on the roof and the like. The building opened in July of 1976. It was built with a notion that we would receive about 3 million visitors a year. We now receive about 6 or 7. So it's received a lot more wear and tear than was envisioned. And obviously our knowledge about what it takes to maintain precious and delicate objects like this has advanced as well. And so unfortunately, we're looking at a price tag of probably $500 million to fully renovate that building. It's a project that we're currently in the process of design on. We would hope to begin construction on the renovation sometime in 2017. And our plan is to try during the course of that renovation to keep portions of the building open to the public because, again, since it is one of the most heavily visited museums in the world and one of our most heavily visited, we don't want to take all of those objects offline if we can possibly avoid that.
Wow, that is a huge price tag.
Yes, it is.
Okay, I appreciate that. Chair recognizes Mr. Vargas for questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I can't help but get excited when you talked about your family's involvement with the Smithsonian. I'd be remiss to say that in San Diego we have affiliated museums. We also have the San Diego Air and Aerospace Museum that is affiliated with the Smithsonian, and it's the same thing there. You get a lot of the pilots. They not only hang around there, but they also teach the kids how to work on planes and how to repair them, create them, and it's really exciting. I've had a chance to go there a few times, and they really do a great deal. So I would be remiss if I didn't thank the Smithsonian, because I think there's 4 or 5 institutions actually in Balboa Park that are affiliated with the Smithsonian. When you were talking about if citizens can't come to the Smithsonian will come to them, I know that you do that with affiliated museums, and we appreciate that certainly in San Diego, and I'm sure throughout the country. I do want to ask a couple of questions. Does the Smithsonian have a public position on the creation of a potential museum of American Latino museum? And if Congress were to authorize it, could the Smithsonian absorb the work involved with the project?
Should Congress authorize and approve funding for a Smithsonian American Latino Museum, we would be honored to add such a museum to our portfolio, and we would do everything in our power to do an exceptional job in delivering a museum to the American people.
Thank you. Second question, what effect has sequestration had on the Smithsonian's operations over the last few years, if any?
The budgetary uncertainty around the federal budget has certainly forced us to do a lot of scenario planning and rethinking about priorities and potential new programs. We were able to weather We were able to weather the sequestration that was implemented a couple of years ago because we had done a lot of preparation. But we knew if there were long-term and additional reductions made, we would have to fundamentally rethink some of the basic operating premises of the institution. As you might imagine, given some of our facilities challenges, like the one I just mentioned previously, we are obviously keenly aware of how important continued strong federal funding will be for us to not only deal with some of those more acute problems, but to allow us to continue to push forward in terms of digitization, collection care initiatives, expansion of education programs, and the like. So at present, we continue to develop a number of different strategies depending on the levels of funding. We've also spent quite a bit of time and effort to ensure that our ability to raise non-federal funds, private funds through philanthropy, through sponsored project support and other means are as advanced and as effective as possible.
Thank you. By the way, a little pet peeve of mine, sequestration. I wasn't here when they voted on it. It comes from the Latin term sequi, to set aside. That's why you sequester a jury. It doesn't mean across the board cuts. But anyway, it's just a little pet peeve of mine. I don't know why they use that term, but anyway, it is the term they chose. We're all very excited, all of us, about the opening of the National African American Museum next year. Are there any special events planned around it that the public should be aware of?
We are in the midst of planning for the grand opening of the museum next fall, and so we're at the early stages. We intend to begin doing some preliminary kinds of events leading up to that. The museum itself is not waiting for the building to be finished. We just opened a new exhibit in American history to begin showing some of the collection that's been amassed over the course of the last several years, called Through the African American Lens, and I would encourage everyone who has an opportunity to go and see it. And so in expectation of the museum opening and not just generating excitement from the seemingly day-to-day changes that take place in the construction, we're trying to do programming and the like to get people excited and ready for the opening of the museum.
My time is up, and again, thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Harper from Mississippi.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your service in such an important role. And I'll have to say, last night, I hope everyone got to go to the Congressional Night at the National Portrait Gallery. It was an incredible location and very well done. So thanks to all that were involved in that. Now, there is always concern on the upkeep of buildings and making sure that we don't defer maintenance. That happens sometimes just because the money's not there. And I know we have a new museum that has been talked about that will open next year. A very exciting time. There are others that are being discussed. But there's also a concern that as we go forward and we build new museums, that we have the ability to maintain them and do the upkeep and maintenance. So this is going to be a major lift. But as far as families, Air and Space Museum is one that everyone likes to go to. And it's very special because there's a plane there from my congressional district, from Meridian, Mississippi, the Key Brothers airplane called the Ole Miss, for which they set the record for longest time in the air, 27 days back in 1935. And their partner, mechanic, inventor, friend, Mr. A.D. Hunter, invented the shutoff valve so you could safely transfer the fuel, which even today, with just some minor modifications, is still what's used today. And you've got this single-engine plane that they stayed in for 27 days with a catwalk built around it because they had to climb out and service the engine during flight. So during construction, we're confident that'll be fully displayed. But anyways, that's another another deal there. But it's true. Every exhibit has a great story. And so we're very thankful for that and those opportunities that are there. How do you foresee going forward? And I know Chairman Miller discussed this. You're planning on keeping this open, at least in part, during those construction years. How many years will that air and space renovation take place?
We are still in the midst of very detailed design and planning. Right now, our best estimate is it will take about 4.5 years of renovation time, and we will try to do it in phases through the building. It's a little complicated because all of the building systems are integrated, but that's part of the challenge of what we're trying to study at this point. So again, it is very, very important for us to try as much as possible to keep portions of that building open so that our visitors can continue to benefit from the tremendous artifacts that we have.
And other buildings are aging as well.
Right.
And will have those needs as well. Is there a plan for which we will make sure that maybe we don't wind up with a big hit and where maybe you see doing these along in stages where we don't wind up with a $500 million one-time or over a few years major renovation?
Yes. There are a couple of examples where we have been doing that over the last several years. The Natural History Museum, everyone knows the Dinosaur Hall is currently closed. That's partially driven by the desire and need to renovate that portion of the building as well as do some needed maintenance on the artifacts. We've taken the same approach at American History. So back in 2008, we reopened the center core of the building, now the Star-Spangled Banner Hall. We're working on the west side of the building and are very excited about reopening the first floor of that renovated space in July. And we've taken the same approach at the National Zoo. So to the extent in some of the larger, more complex buildings where taking on the entire building would be astronomical in terms of cost, we've tried to parse them out. In some cases, like at the Air and Space Museum, because of the way the building was built, it's just not as practical to be able to close portions of it and work on it in various points in time. One of our biggest challenges is making sure that we continue to address the most pressing needs and try to use a combination of both maintenance as well as facilities capital funding to be as thoughtful as possible and keep our buildings in
And my time is almost over, but let me ask you this. 138 million items, probably more. Not everything we probably want to keep. I'm a bit of a pack rat, so I don't want to throw anything away. But when you're deciding new items to go into the collection, just if you could just very quickly, is there a basic criteria that you have or how that's decided on?
Certainly. We look at the importance of that object to the collection and the particular discipline that it supports. We ensure that we can safely and effectively keep it, and we also make sure that we have the expertise to study it and to tell its story.
So not everything makes the cut, obviously.
Not everything makes the cut.
All right.
No.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Chairman Miller, and I wish you well on your next endeavor, going to work for the Smithsonian, as you mentioned. Please, sir, check her references. Don't cut my mic. That's just Vargas. Hey, first off, I want to say thank you, Mr. Acting Secretary. My twin boys, who are 14, going into the 9th grade, were part of a large high school group that was out just last week and enjoyed many of your facilities. Some of the feedback was that, obviously, besides hanging out with me, going to the Smithsonian was actually one of their favorite activities. And it's something that we see many folks and families go through every day here. And so what you do on a regular basis, I think this committee, hopefully today, you understand. We truly appreciate what you do and what the many men and women who work at your facilities do on a regular basis to show what our nation's all about. So thank you for that. Education was a key point of your opening testimony, and I noticed you mentioned some of the STEM programs that the Smithsonian works with school districts throughout this nation, especially through K through 12 education. Can you actually go into a little further what you do at the Smithsonian to ensure that our students who may not be able to make it out here to Washington, D.C., or to other facilities in the nation, how do they have access to your facilities, and how do your STEM programs work? And also, how do teachers who may not be involved with them know how to contact you to get involved?
We have tremendous educational resources at the Smithsonian, some attached to the specific museums or research centers, some that are coordinated in more central ways. One of our big initiatives across the board, and of course in education, is to take what we have and get it to folks regardless of where they are geographically throughout the country. So the Smithsonian Science Education Center for 30 years has been putting together curriculum that is tied to state standards that teachers and school districts can implement and use to teach science to kids from K through 12. It's hands-on learning, and it's supplemented by a number of lesson plans and activities that can be downloaded. All of that material is provided for free. We have a large Smithsonian traveling exhibition service, which takes Smithsonian content throughout the country. And so at many museums, large and small, across the country, you can benefit from the same kind of content that you see in Washington, D.C., at your local museum throughout the country. More and more, we're trying to put a lot of our material online so that even if you're not using some of the more formal materials that we provide, a teacher can download information, can use a variety of support material that we provide to integrate into their classroom. So we view education as central to our mission and as a way of really enlivening these objects and telling their story and using them in a way that helps inspire kids to learn.
Well, I appreciate what you do to make that happen. Again, for many students who don't get a chance to come out here and experience what we see and sometimes take for granted on a daily basis, what can we do as an institution to help encourage more activity and more usage of your programs?
Well, I think you're doing it. The more that we can engage people in our facilities, in our programs, to understand the richness, the breadth, and the depth of what we do, I think together we can learn places where perhaps we aren't filling a gap, where we could fill a gap. We recognize that we can't do everything, but we believe that we can have a significant impact on improving the delivery of STEM education throughout the country, in telling history, in teaching history, particularly about the history of the American experience and the like.
All right, one last question. Do you have an idea, if you can give me an estimated percentage of how many school districts you're putting your STEM education program into nationwide?
I can get you specific numbers as part of the final testimony. I don't have those numbers offhand, but we make them available to anyone who wants them, and we actively engage with folks across the country.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Madam Chairman. I'm going to yield back so that our star pitcher from the congressional baseball game can have time to ask questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Walker, our star pitcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Kesher. I'm fascinated by Smithsonian over the years, something that predates even our Civil War by nearly 15 years. I believe you've been there about 5 years. Is that correct?
4, yes.
4 years. One of the things you talked about, I've got a couple questions I want to get to, but something that you brought up that I wanted a little bit more information on. We talked about the African American Museum that's opening. What is the open date? Do we have that projected?
It's fall of 2016. We don't have a specific date yet identified.
And my question specifically regarding that, exhibits and history there, will we remove those some? For example, I was just thinking of George Washington Carver as you were talking and all the different inventions and what amazing man he was. Do we remove that from one Smithsonian to put it in, or do we duplicate it? Can you talk about that process? Because I don't want one missing or one or the other. If you only have time to go to one or the other, is that do you understand where I'm coming from? Does that make okay?
We on pretty frequent basis move collections around our various museums. So the American Art Museum actually tells the story of America through art as opposed to specific historic artifacts. And so we'll sometimes move paintings from there to the American History Museum. So there will be times when certain objects will move back and forth depending on the nature of the exhibition that's on, or the particular story that we're trying to tell. So things will move around on a routine basis.
Yes, and I appreciate you answering. My concern is that we make sure that all students are getting a great history from some of the people of ethnic backgrounds who've impacted us, and they didn't miss that even if they were hitting one and not hitting the other one. A lot of technological advances in the last few years. Can you discuss strategy as far as connecting the Smithsonian and continuing to make it attractive to the younger generation? We see so many times in corporate world, or my background is ministry world, where we don't make the adaptations to connect with the next generation. Can you talk about, is there a marketing strategy? How do we move forward with that?
It's a big thrust for us, ensuring that we have an institution that appeals to people who look like me and people a lot younger like my son. One example of what we've been able to do is the recently renovated and reopened Cooper Hewitt Museum in New York. We closed that museum for 3 years, fully renovated it, and reopened it in December to great fanfare by integrating tremendous amounts of technology into the visitor experience. And so there's a new object called the pen, which you can get when you walk in the door. And as you go along through the various exhibits, you touch a particular part of the exhibit, and it downloads that object into an account for you, which you can then, when you're finished, email to yourself and continue to curate your collection when you get home, or learn more about it because you only had a limited amount of time at the museum. We're looking at the African American History and Culture Museum as well, to integrate tons and tons of interactive digital and video experiences into the more traditional experience of physical objects. So we're taking that very, very seriously and looking to
do you find that as a difficult balance? Because you don't want to dumb down some of the exhibits and some of the historical aspects of it, and I guess that's part of the process as far as trying to find the right balance. Is that a fair assessment?
I think what we're looking for are opportunities to really amplify the objects. One of the latest apps that we created in natural history is called Skin and Bones. It's very cool. You take your phone, you look at a particular skeleton, and on your phone that skeleton comes to life, and you can see what that object, that skeleton looked like when it was on the ground, and it does some virtual reality movement and the like. So we think that technology can really enhance the experience by giving you a much richer opportunity to dig in and to learn more about what you're...
I appreciate you guys working hard to be proactive in the days ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Horvath, for yield backs.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Talking about skeletons, let me just ask you a question here about the natural history, the dinosaur, the T-Rex exhibit. And you know, it's too bad you've had to close the entire dinosaur exhibit down, but I guess I understand that. But when is it all going to be open again?
2019.
2019?
2019,
so
yes.
You can't open any part of it without all of it opening?
No. All of the renovation is pretty extensive that we need to do to what is a fairly large piece of the building. And the exhibits themselves, the skeletons and the like, are undergoing a fairly sensitive restoration as well. That's pretty painstaking work. So what we're trying to do, again, through technology and other means, is to try to satisfy that dinosaur itch that a lot of people have, because that is one of the most popular exhibitions that we have.
Yeah, it really is. Just one last question, and we'll conclude the hearing here. But we've had an opportunity to talk a bit about the possibility. I suppose you're going through the process right now of looking at the possibility of doing something over in London. Perhaps you could tell us just a little bit about that so we have it on the record that you are looking into the process. I know your regents have talked about it a bit, and whether or not you think that is something that is a good idea, is appropriate. I mean, we've got sort of deferred maintenance on some of these other facilities. Should we be doing that, and what is the reason for it, et cetera?
Certainly. As you might imagine, we are presented with lots and lots of opportunities on a regular basis to do interesting things. This opportunity in London was presented to us by the Mayor of London about a year or so ago. His vision in the redevelopment of the facility that housed the 2012 Summer Games includes the creation of a cultural and educational quarter that would be populated with a number of cultural and education institutions, and his desire was to have the Smithsonian be part of that. It's an interesting idea. It certainly is interesting to think about doing something in the land of Smithson. Early on, we considered it and went back to them with a certain set of criteria. First, we would need a significant amount of support in order to do this. Secondly, we would not ask Congress for any additional funding to support this, so it would have to be something that would be supported by private funding. And we would have to be sure that it fit within the mission of the Smithsonian. I think we were able to satisfy ourselves on the mission centricity of it. We're a very global entity already. A lot of that international work is focused on scientific research. This would be the first opportunity for the Smithsonian to be able to tell the story of America abroad. So it has a tremendous amount of appeal in that way. We indicated that we would need to have space provided to us. We could not raise funding for that, and the mayor and his team have identified a significant amount of private support that would enable that to happen. And the final piece of the assessment that we're in the midst of right now is really looking at the financial model that we would need to implement and whether it would be able to sustain us for a long period of time. So we're still in the investigative phase. We're excited about the prospect. We haven't made a final decision. And as you might imagine, we've been in close contact with Dr. Skorton to ensure that his input is part of the overall process and that he feels comfortable with the progress or decisions that we're making along the way.
Well, thank you very much for that, and we'll want to be kept in the information loop as that process goes forward, certainly, but I think that is a very interesting idea. Without objection, I would say that all members will have 5 legislative days to submit to the chair additional written questions for the witness, which we will forward and ask the witness to respond as promptly as they can, so that those answers might be made part of the record. And we certainly appreciate your attendance here today and appreciate your service, your continuing service at the Smithsonian. And we want to thank, as Mr. Davis said, all of the employees of the Smithsonian, some of who are here today. You have a tremendous group of dedicated and committed individuals that really make it all happen there. So we certainly appreciate their service as well. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.